Since ancient times, philosophers like Plato, Socrates and Aristotle have thought long and hard about what makes us happy.
We've been thinking about that today. The modern-day illusionist, Derren has more of an insight into people's heads than most, having made a career out of his mind-reading performances.
But when he started to think about what makes us happy for his new book, he found himself going back in history and asking what we have learned from the past. And he's here to tell us all about it. So we've got some of the great Greek thinkers on the screens behind us. What have we been missing out on then for the past few thousand years?
Yeah, I think the question of happiness now left to the self-help industry isn't very well answered. They sort of tell us things that sound very plausible, like you should set your goals, you should think very positively and believe in yourself and so on. And that's all right enough in sort of small doses, but it can often leave people feeling that they've sort of failed and that it's their own fault, setting goals, and then, you know, you can spend your life climbing a ladder and realise you had the ladder against the wrong wall, as Joseph Conrad said. So what I've done is I've gone back to 2,000 years ago when these questions were really thought about, what it was to live well, what it is to flourish. And a lot of what they were saying is rather than trying to control everything to bring it in line with your aims, is to actually kind of accept that most things are out of your control and to live comfortably with that idea. So rather than sort of chasing after this thing called happiness, thinking it's something we're entitled to, a sort of a birthright, but then also at the same time not knowing what it is, because no one's really going to tell you exactly what that thing is, they saw it as a kind of, if you just remove all the disturbances, what you're left with is a sort of tranquility, a quite robust, solid sense of tranquility, like you've pulled your centre of gravity back into yourself. So it's not really necessarily pleasure, it doesn't sound very joyful, but actually it's a much stronger and more realistic and ultimately, I think, happier place to be.
It sounds to me a bit more sort of like, I suppose how I would describe it, as contentment.
Tranquility, ataraxia was the word that they used, but they were also the Stoics who really pushed this idea, and I got very interested in Stoicism over the last few years. They were big movers and shakers, so Marcus Aurelius was like probably the biggest, most powerful emperor, ruler we've ever had. They were politicians, they were people that got stuff done, but at the same time they had this great sense of sort of stillness about them. It's about not emotionally investing in things that are out of your control, and it's a very it's just got lost in the mix over the last couple of thousand years, and I think it's really due for a comeback. What
I found really interesting is people are saying, oh, this is a real departure from what we would normally see and what you hear you talking about. And yet, with magic, it's always down to sort of the things you choose to ignore, isn't it? In a card trick, you choose to ignore a certain thing, the sleight of hand, because you want to be amazed by it. I wonder whether that's applicable to happiness as well, because you know, if you want to be happy, you sort of choose to forget the bad stuff.
Absolutely. What a magician does is sells you a story. So you kind of you think the story went point A to point B to point C, and that's some amazing, impossible thing. Normally, all the information you need to work out the trick is right there in front of you, but you're sort of subtly nudged into editing that story in a certain way to tell yourself this sort of impossible event has happened. And that's what we do in life all the time. It's not events, as the Stoics said, it's not events in the world that cause our problems, it's those stories we tell ourselves about those events. When we get angry or frustrated about something, it's not the thing itself, because if you ask yourself, do I actually have a problem right now? The answer's normally no. But we tell ourselves a story about it. We entertain how things are going to be in the future, or we replay stuff that's happened in the past. And taking control of those sort of stories that we tell ourselves and not just succumbing to them is a very useful thing, and it does absolutely time with magic, yeah.
You also talk about sort of fame and fortune and why, again, they don't necessarily at all make people happy.
No, they don't. Fortune, money, up to a certain point, what all the research has shown is that if you earn less than is sort of comfortable, that can make you unhappy. But if you earn more than a sort of a comfortable figure, depending on where you live and so on, doesn't make you any happier. You don't get incrementally happier. So richness doesn't make you happier. Success certainly doesn't either, because these are not things that ever really arrive. They just sort of slowly happen, and so if you chase those things for their own sake, like happiness or success or whatever, you just drive yourself mad. So those are byproducts, aren't they? Happiness is another. It's a byproduct of finding meaning or stillness and these things.
Yes, treasures on earth, isn't it? Yeah. Colin sent in a question which we read, but I wanted to put this to you as well. He said, happiness, the moment you think about it, it disappears. Can you only recognise it in hindsight?
That's a really good point. I always think that the rainbow is a very good image for happiness. From a distance, you can kind of recognise it as something over there, but the moment you approach it directly, it just disappears. And yet we all think that it's this thing that we're entitled to, like it's really obvious that like we'll recognise it when we get there. You know, we do these A-levels to go to this university and study this subject, to get this job, to get this promotion, to what? Like it's this thing that never really sort of arrives. So rooting yourself a little more in life at the moment rather than just letting it happen in the interim, I think is very healthy. So yes, that's a very good point, isn't it?
It's very interesting because I did a little survey in the office and asked people, you know, what makes you happy, and everybody's got an answer. And they're kind of transit. They can be complete different. You know, it's dogs. It can be dancing. Their pets. It can be cake. It can be dancing.
Yeah.
Everybody, we have an answer to this, don't we? Within ourselves, in some ways.
They do. They tend to be. I mean, those are all lovely answers. They tend to be things that bring us momentary happiness.
Yes, they're transient, aren't they?
Yeah, or pleasure, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think happiness itself, if you can find it, and I can think you have to find it indirectly, but it comes more, again, from the story. It's a sort of... they used to say you couldn't judge if someone was happy until the end of their life, that it's more to do with that, the way you... So, for example, if you don't go on a roller coaster for an afternoon and you stay at home and look after a sick relative, you'll probably have less pleasure doing that, but maybe as you look back on what you do with your life, you might feel happier that you made those sorts of choices. So they are different things.
Derren, really good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
And the book is called, guess what? Happy.
We'd like to explore it more, yeah.